So the realities have changed the dynamics of this race in the last 18 hours, where if you go on social media, Trump, rage tweeting at 2 a.m. tells you this hurts. He doesn't know what to do with this. And we can get into whether or not there'll be a debate. I don't think there will be. How this is going to play out in terms of who she ultimately picks to go up against J.D. Vance. I think that will be an important decision. But just what Joe Biden did in placing his imprimatur on her candidacy for the presidency changed the trajectory of this race.
Hello, and welcome to the Politics Girl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. So, the podcast I had scheduled for today obviously had to be moved since the breaking news on the weekend of President Biden dropping out of the presidential race. To talk to us today about what it means as both an outsider and an insider, I am joined by former RNC chair and co-host of the new MSNBC show, The Weekend, Michael Steele. Michael is the former lieutenant governor of Maryland, who was the incredible successful leader of the Republican National Committee in the days before Trump gave it to his family, breaking fundraising records and winning the biggest pick of House seats for the party in modern history. His leadership produced 12 Republican governorships and the greatest share of state legislative seats since 1928. So this man understands what it takes to pick a candidate, run a successful convention, and turn a game around. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, former chair of the RNC, host of the Michael Steele podcast, and co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Michael Steele. Thank you for coming, Michael.
I just love hanging with you. I am so excited to be back in your neighborhood. Thank you so much, Lee, for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks for coming. I mean, honestly, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at you, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I'm going to quote Vladimir Lenin right now, who's, Steve Bannon's favorite guy. But I can't stop thinking of the quote that's attributed to him, which is, there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are weeks where decades happen. And I kind of feel like that's where we are right now.
That is such, actually, it's a very apropos quote, which runs along and aligns with the old Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times.
Yes.
And what people don't understand about that quote is, about that proverb, it is a curse. It's not a blessing. It is not something that people like, oh, well, may you live in interesting times where things are, no, this is like, interesting times are not good. And we see this alignment where, decades are getting played out literally in weeks and even in some cases, 24-hour news cycles. And these times have been interesting since about January of 2017, when the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, took to the national and global stage and painted a dystopian view of America and the world in his inaugural speech.
For people that know, this is the American Carnage speech. This is when he was talking about American Carnage.
Yes, the American Carnage speech. And we have been navigating through that ever since. And what is still stunning to me is that people in the political class as well as the media class have not figured out what this is. There are so many signs where they still try to treat this period and this particular candidate now running for election again to the presidency as normal and as any other candidate. And so both, that proverb and that Lenin quote encapsulates this moment where the country is really at a crossroads that sit on a precipice. And it's really going to be a challenge to have the right framing of America to figure out what the next step is, because that next step can either take you further down a road or off a cliff.
Yeah. I often say, you know, that scene in the movie where like the car is teetering on the cliff, where everyone in the car is trying to lean backwards and make sure that it doesn't go over. I'm like, literally, that's where the country is. And we all have to lean the same direction to not only get the car back on solid ground and then set a stronger, straighter direction for where we want to go. But we are right at that precipice right now. And people need to understand that. I often say, like, please, can we just live in a precedented time for once? Just like be calm, for crying out. Like, just give me some precedent. Like, that's all I want right now.
You know, can we just live in an age where it's just boring?
Just boring. I want to wake up in the morning and be like, what's the weather? Not like, God, what happened? You know, like, it's just exhausting. So listen, for those of you who might have been on vacation or, you know, missed it somehow, we found out on Sunday from what felt from the outside like a full-on shanking of the punditry and donor class, with kind of an assist from the media, that our current successful sitting president will be stepping away from running for president in 2024, and we will have a new Democratic presidential nominee. Now, I'm not going to bother to go into any more detail or give my opinions or thoughts about this move, because honestly, at this point, it doesn't really matter. What's done is done. The president has made his decision, and he did it in the right amount of time before the convention, and now we have to pivot and win against the existential threat that is the Trump-Vance Project 2025 ticket. So do you have any thoughts on that? On how it all happened before we sort of leave that part of the conversation?
I do.
You're like, no, Lee, I have no thoughts at all.
I have nothing to say on that.
Zero to say.
I've had a lot to say on that, and was very clear in what I thought was an abuse of against the president, Joe Biden, by his own party. There were ways in which this could have been done cleaner, more quiet, and with a sense of deference. It is one thing. I mean, folks, you just need to understand, and I've been in this space, so I know a lot of how Joe Biden looked at this and how he felt about it. When people that you have helped get out of jams, similar jams, Nancy Pelosi, and have been aligned with, suddenly saying these nice things about you as they're taking the knife and pushing it deeper into your back. So I had a problem with that largely because I'm a chairman. I run parties at every level of our political structure. And the one thing you're always concerned about is your base, and what actions do to move your base into the game or move your base away from the game. And with the fixation on donors, which, the major donors, they were a big driver in this. The base was not. The political elites were a big driver in this. The base was not. And the political electeds were a big driver in this. The base was not. So you have to be concerned about how this is resonating with them. After that debate, by Saturday, the Democratic base consolidated around Joe Biden. How do we know that? Because he did not lose any significant ground in the polling. Joe Biden was 4 points down before the debate. By that Tuesday, he was 6 points down after the debate. As of the day he left, he was within a point or two on the national average. So there was clearly not this wholesale, oh my God, hair on fire, run away from Joe Biden. In polling that showed 75% of those polled said Joe Biden should not be the nominee of the Democratic Party. When asked who they would vote for between Biden and Trump, because that's the ticket, 45-45. So again, he was competitive. So my concern was where they would go. Where they landed was a better place because of how Joe Biden decided to exit. And
that's right.
He did so in a way in which he did two things: acknowledge what everyone had been saying. Okay, I realize that there's no pathway for me to win this. but then to embrace his vice president as the heir apparent, if you will. And people hate that terminology, but come on, let's go with it, because that's essentially what it is. He endorsed Kamala Harris, and that then, as you saw, Lee, ignited a fervor with the base, which donated an unprecedented amount of cash within 5 hours, $27 million within 5 hours, well over $50 million and counting in the hours after that. And then, of course, the consolidation of those three classes. The donor class is still hanging out there, so let's set them aside for a moment. But the political...
Let's set them aside for forever.
Right. Well, you know what? As a quick sidebar on that, you make an excellent point, because what you saw happen after Joe Biden stepped aside and endorsed Kamala was what I realized the strength of the party was in 2010, when the donor class decided to push me aside and to follow the likes of Karl Rove and others to their super PACs and didn't want to give to the RNC. For the first time, we set up our own small dollar donor program based off of Barack Obama's effort in his 2008 campaign and his Obama for America campaign, where it was largely driven by small dollar donors. And we raised, within 18 months, well over $120 million from small dollar donors, to a total of $192 million when the big dollars came back, when they thought, oh yeah, now it looks like we're going to win. Then they showed up. But you make a good point about the power of small dollar donations in driving elections. And those are the dollars that candidates and campaigns listen to. Because when grandma says, here, put $20 a month on my credit card for your campaign, that carries a lot more weight than having, a multi-billion-dollar donor strike you a big check. Why? Because there's only one of those or three of those billion-dollar donors. There are hundreds of thousands of grandmas out there, and they vote. And they vote. So you make an excellent point there, and I think you saw that consolidation happen in a way that rejuvenated the core of the base around the idea of winning again. Not that they didn't think they could win with Joe Biden, but the energy level is different, because a number of those folks in the coalition, young voters, progressive voters, are likely now to rally around Kamala in a way that some thought would be a little bit more difficult with Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think often in some ways it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell people over and over and over again that Joe Biden can't win, that he's too old, that he can't do anything, then every single thing he says and does is going to seem old or whatever. When I kept thinking the contrast between Joe Biden and the other presidential candidate, I mean, he's way more incoherent. He's just as old. His policies are horrifying. It's terrible for women. It's terrible for immigrants. It's terrible for the LGBTQ community. There were so many things to run on that weren't the man, right? And so to me, it seemed like it was a terrible way to take him out. I thought it was classless. I thought it was done incredibly poorly. Of course, at the end of the day, I think it is absolutely amazing that Joe Biden himself is the one that raised the quality in the room, the way he left. He did it again. He brought class back to America. He allowed us to rally around. I think the whole concept, which I think we should talk about a little bit later, of an open convention is idiotic. I think it is Kamala, period, the end. Let us rally. Let us be excited. Like you said, the young people are thrilled. I've been saying this for years. Like, there's a lot of old guard people that are like, I don't know, a woman leading us. The kids, they don't feel like that. They do not feel like that. They are absolutely jazzed by her. And she is a powerhouse. And I've been saying that for years too. If you knew more about her, you would be less scared of Joe Biden's age. And now Joe Biden's age is off the table. And I think the question becomes who they culminate around, her and whom, because I don't think there is another.
Can I peel back a little
option.
bit on a point you just made about young voters? I think it's very
Please.
important. Let's just set on the table a truth that we don't like to acknowledge about us, and by us I mean U.S. country, is that we are very misogynistic as
Very.
a nation. You saw some of that play out at the RNC convention, where you had that, sort of, testosterone laden sort of presentation that really was offensive. I mean, having it's a man's world be a theme song. It spoke to a lot of the wrong stuff, right? In my
Well, if
view.
I may, Michael, this is the most anti-woman ticket in American history between Trump and Vance.
Yeah,
They genuinely hate women.
well, and the
Genuinely
fact
have zero respect for us.
and the fact that these attitudes are now out here that view women through a 1950s lens, where they're at home with an apron waiting for hubby to come in so that they can, make them comfortable, serve them a cocktail before dinner, put their feet up. The children come in, oh, daddy, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're home. And he's the quote man of the house. Well, that home never existed in America. It has never existed. It was created by ad gurus in the 1950s. It never
Yeah, it's
existed.
this wholesale sale of the American dream.
Exactly. So you have this sort of notion of manhood in this sort of jacked up environment. And then you have this idea about a female candidate running for office and how that's viewed through those lenses. And what's interesting about the point you made about young voters is go back to Hillary's run in 2016. Those young voters who are going to play in this cycle were about 13, 14, 15 years old at the time. And their numbers were not in a way that would have any real impact. Today, that's not the case. So they have watched the 4 years of the misogyny, the grab them by the pee, the pronouncements by Donald Trump against women of color, women in power, through whether it's an April Ryan in a press briefing, or any other woman who challenges his quote manhood.
Yeah, like when he was running for president in the first place and he said, who would listen to that face?
Right,
He's been
exactly.
doing that stuff for years, calling us pigs and dogs. And then on top of that, you take away our rights. And I think that young women have absolutely frickin' had it. And I think young men understand enough that this is not the world that they mostly want to live in either, unless they are weak men who can't live in a world in which equality exists.
And
that's its own incel community.
And that steroid and latent testosterone is what is prevalent on the right. Those young women and men are now 18, 19 years old, and they will be voting for the first time for president. And I think having someone like a Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side does change this landscape considerably, because those voters, those younger voters, don't come into the game with those 1950 views that were passed down generationally and that still permeate at some level with some of their cohorts, as a matter of fact, because they grew up in these households. And that dynamic, I think, is going to be one that's going to be very interesting to watch play out, both along the lines of race and along the lines of gender. And since they both culminate with Kamala, and by the way, folks on the right, on my party, learn how to say her name, because we get the gaslighting that you're doing when you call her something other than her name is. It's Kamala, all right? Put the accent on the right syllable, you'll be okay. So the realities have changed the dynamics of this race in the last 18 hours, where if you go on social media, Trump, rage tweeting at 2 a.m. tells you he's this hurts. He doesn't know what to do with this. And we can get into whether or not there'll be a debate. I don't think there will be. How this is going to play out in terms of who she ultimately picks to go up against J.D. Vance. I think that will be an important decision. But just what Joe Biden did in placing his imprimatur on her candidacy for the presidency changed the trajectory of this race.
I completely agree. I completely agree with that. And I have to say, it was very hopeful seeing the amount of people who rallied around the idea, because I have always loved her. I know the young people love her, but it was great to see, party chairs, delegates from different states, anyone that might have been an absolute competitor for her right away coming out to endorse her. I thought these were really good things. Let's just quickly back it up so people understand, as much as most of us want it, and the ticket doesn't automatically go to Vice President Kamala Harris. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just going to say this is what is going to happen now. The Democratic Party can either hold what's called a mini primary in the next few weeks, where lots of different people throw their hat in the ring, and most likely the party officials, not the voters, would decide who the nominee would be. Or everyone rallies around the same candidate. That person goes in the convention as the de facto nominee, which is what I think is happening now with Kamala. Or they wait until the convention and they have all the delegates released from their responsibility to vote for Biden-Harris. And then the delegates would vote for their choice, which would be considered an open convention. We would not have consensus on that first vote. So then we would have a second vote, which would include what are called superdelegates, which the party leaders come in. The Republicans don't have superdelegates, the Democrats do, and they would be joining in the votes. And then it would be more of a brokered convention sense, where the powers that be kind of got to make a bunch of consolidations and backroom deals and who they thought would have the best chance when they put their votes into the hat. Regardless of how all this happens, the new nominee will be chosen officially at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, which starts on August 19th. Now, did I get that incorrect? What are your thoughts on how that's going to play?
No, you got that right. I would just flesh out so people know who a superdelegate is. A superdelegate are elected officials, basically. It's the governors.
People like Barack Obama.
Right. Former
Ron
elected
Klain
officials.
actually is in there. People like that.
So there's about 400 of those. There are approximately 700 uncommitted delegates, which is a big number.
It's a big number.
Joe Biden has about 3,980, some number like that, of the delegates, which is well more than he needs.
Yeah, it's a vast majority. It's about 88% of the delegates.
Right. So in the three scenarios that you laid out, the first one, where the party officials decide who the individual will be, that's largely a brokered convention. That's sort of the back room where everybody kind of brokers a deal to put someone forward. And
it's the old school way of doing it, when people think of like old men in back rooms, cigar chomping, deciding on who it's going to be.
Right. And the third way you described it, where it's much more of an open, free-for-all, no one's committed to anyone. Joe Biden's released his delegates and they're just kind of free to roam the range until they decide where they land. And then in that process, you may have some brokering that occurs to sort of narrow and control the flow of things. Those two scenarios are problematic. In the first, the delegates don't have a role to play. The 14 million citizens who voted in the primaries are largely ignored. That creates a real problem for the party because of the way the Democrats are structurally organized and emotionally connected to the process. It would be a mess. The third scenario is also a mess because you can't control it. Then it's everybody in the pool. Kamala is no different than Pete Buttigieg in terms of viability and electability among the delegates, and that just turns into a free for all that you can't control, and you don't know how many days it's going to go, et cetera.
And they all end up attacking each other, and we do damage to ourselves.
Exactly. The middle route is where this is likely to land and makes the most sense, where Joe Biden, and you see this already, by his placing his hands on her, you already have now 5 states, I think maybe 6 states, that have already announced that their delegation of delegates are all voting for Kamala Harris. So they've committed their delegates going into the process to Kamala. There's also, under DNC rules, they're going to be hosting, I believe, on the 7th of August, somewhere around there, a basically a nominating process, a virtual nominating process. And in that process, that's where those delegates that Joe Biden has are going to transfer to Kamala. And that process is what you're seeing happen, lay out already by those states coming out early and saying, hey, we're committing to Kamala our 13 delegates, our 27 delegates, our 50 delegates, whatever the number is. So she's already now got committed to her delegates going into that. And likely you'll see, Lee, over the next 3 to 5 days, more states go down that pathway. And so she'll walk into that convention probably with all the delegates she'll need on the first ballot.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the other thing we have to know is that Kamala Harris is the only person that would have full access to the money that's already been raised for the Biden campaign. Because of campaign finance rules, she's already on that ticket, and it's at least $100 million. And that's not including the money that was raised the day that she announced she would be running. If Biden has stepped down and he endorses her, she has full access to that money, which is a very necessary thing to run a campaign. And if the nominee ended up being someone else, that person would not have access to that money. They would most likely have to start their fundraising from scratch. I don't know how the Democrats would plan to get money back to people who had donated to Biden Harris.
What they would do there is that's federal dollars. Those are federal dollars, and there are very stringent restrictions on how those dollars can be used and who can use them and how they're applied. So if, for example, he did not transfer that money to Kamala, in other words, he didn't want her to have it, or however that may work out, those dollars would go to the DNC. And then the DNC would be further restricted in how it could allocate those monies. So to your initial point, that $100 million for any other candidate would be wholly inaccessible. And to the extent that they get any of it, what they would get would come from the DNC, and it would be a very, very small portion compared to the $100 million that Kamala would get by virtue of already being named on that account under Biden Harris. What they did, and you saw this yesterday, they went back, amended their FEC, their Federal Election Commission forms, to take off Joe Biden. So Biden-Harris 2024 is now Harris, fill in the blank, to be determined 2024. And soon as that VP is identified, their names will be added, a form will be further amended to add that individual's name. So that is the chain of custody for that money from Biden to Harris, all within the FEC rules. So when you hear Republicans out here talking about some violation of the FEC law, the idea that because Joe Biden has decided not to run, he now must resign the presidency because he was not.
Michael, it's so ridiculous. I mean, come on. It's not, he didn't, he's just like, hey, I'm not going to run for a second term. There's no rule that says you have to run for a second term or step down as president. In fact, it is better. Now you have a man full on running the country, not distracted at all, dealing with the problems of America, a man being the president and a woman running for the president. Those are two completely different jobs. And guess what? We actually are in a better situation. The idea that he would have to step down, the idea, I'm sorry, your old party has lost it completely.
But let me tell you
why.
Like,
you know what? 25th Amendment. Oh.
But let me tell you why they're so stupid. So let me get this straight. You want Joe Biden to now step down as president, thereby making Kamala Harris the president. So now you've just given the country the first Black female president, right? So she's no longer running as a candidate. She's running as an incumbent president for election to the office. You think that's a better plan? Just so stupid.
Support for today's episode comes from OneSkin. And if you have sensitive skin, you know how hard it can be to find a product that doesn't cause irritation. But OneSkin's topical supplements are formulated with soothing ingredients and natural antioxidants that are gentle enough to use every day. Free from over 1,500 chemicals and preservatives that can make your skin red or irritated or itchy, their products are safe for sensitive skin. OneSkin's products are powered by their scientifically proven peptide called OS1. This peptide reduces the accumulation of damaged, aging cells, the ones that make your skin less resilient and more prone to lines and wrinkles. OneSkin has a full line of face and body products, including Shield, which is their sunscreen, and what I have been using all summer, that prevents UV-induced aging and repairs cellular aging all at once. I wear it every day, even on my arms, because the sun in the car. I really like it. It's smooth and easily absorbable. As someone with sensitive skin, I have had absolutely no trouble. Founded by an all-woman team of scientists, OneSkin's products are backed by extensive lab and clinical data to validate their success and safety on all skin types. Not only that, they're the first and only skin company to target cellular sentience, which is a key hallmark of aging. Their topical supplements are the easiest way to keep your skin healthy and hydrated without the harsh ingredients or irritation often found in other skincare products. So try it for yourself. OneSkin is more than skincare. It's about skin longevity, targeting the root cause of aging to help you look and feel your best at every age. Get started today with 15% off by using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, if they ask you where you heard about them, please support the show and tell them that we sent you. It's time to expect more from your skincare routine. Invest in the health of your skin with OneSkin. Today's episode is brought to you by Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you are burning fat or carbs and gives you a tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workout, your sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fat or carbs. Then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you the tips to keep you at the top of your health game. Your metabolism is your body's engine. It's how your body turns your food into fuel to keep you going. At the end of the day, your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does. And optimal metabolic health means easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, and even better sleep. And for the record, it can also track your cycle, as well as the onset of menopause, and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through your hormonal shifts, so you can keep your energy up and stave off cravings. And I think that sounds incredibly helpful. So if you want to take the next step to improving your health, go to lumen.me/politicsgirl to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/politicsgirl for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about it yet, I wanted to tell you about the great new podcast from my friends at Courier called Vibes Only. I love this podcast, and I love the concept because it's true. We can all talk about politics all day long, but it also comes down to how we generally feel about politics or the state of the country. In other words, the vibes. Co-hosted by Brian Derrick and Glennis Muhar, Vibes Only checks the political vibes every week. It's like having your funniest friends break down the need-to-know political news, but in a way that doesn't make you want to tear your hair out, like we've all wanted to do, this past week. Leading up to critical elections where democracy is on the line, there has never been a better time to listen or subscribe to Vibes Only, and you can do that wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out, because those Courier people really have our backs when it comes to truth and facts. Vibes Only.
So fixated on race and gender, and so fixated on this idea of somehow getting rid of Joe Biden, thinking they're going to mix up the process and make it harder. They lose sight of the fact that what they're asking for will actually make it easier for her, because if Joe Biden resigns as president, she becomes the president. She appoints a vice president and moves on. So then she goes into the convention as an incumbent president running for election. Hello. Yeah. The country now will see. You think that's a worse situation for the country? So it's just I don't understand how they rationalize these things, but yeah, it makes you kind of fall out laugh because it's so stupid.
Well, I think honestly, the Republicans in many cases, because their hate and their bigotry is so strong, it often blinds them from proper decision making. I think, what happened with Roe, it was the dog that caught the car. I feel like what happened with this, it's the dog that caught the car. I saw Stephen Miller and MAGA surrogates like Kellyanne Conway losing it on television yesterday, like literally losing it, talking about how it's so unfair to Democratic primary voters that they're going to get disenfranchised. And I was like, your entire plan for the election of 2024, not to mention the entire plan for the election of 2020, was to disenfranchise all voters, and definitely Democratic voters.
They wanted to disenfranchise voters in Detroit in 2020.
I mean, just throw the votes away.
And in Philadelphia, wherever there were large black population centers in 2020, Kelly Conway and her ilk were running around talking about those votes needed to be discounted because it was clearly fraud in the black community that supported the Democratic candidate. So we have to discount those votes. So don't come crying to me about your concern for the 14 million Democrats who voted in the primary for Joe Biden being disenfranchised. Those folks are good. They like the outcome here. Trust me, they're okay.
Well, also those folks, like I'm one of those folks, and those folks voted for a Biden-Harris ticket.
Yes.
And if Harris remains on the ticket, we got what we wanted in many cases. So like, what other tricks do you think the Republicans have up their sleeve? Because I think we need to tell people who are worried there is no legal reason whatsoever to keep the Democratic ticket off the ballot. Biden is making decisions now, which looks like it gives them plenty of time to get in all 50 states. The earliest deadline appears to be August 21st, which is Montana and Oklahoma. I know that Speaker Johnson and the Heritage Foundation are already talking about legal challenges. There are definitely 50 pieces to this puzzle, with 50 different states having 50 different ideas. There was a lot of talk about Georgia recently. And just so people understand, Biden dropping out will not impact Georgia ballots. If the Democrats have their convention, there's no nominee to replace. It looks like it's going to be Kamala. And if it isn't Kamala, Trump fans are going to be on the ticket in Georgia, along with Oliver for the Libertarians, Jill Stein for the Greens, and also potentially Cornel West, RFK, and Claudia de la Cruz, who are having their signatures reviewed. So just FYI, Georgia, you might have 7 presidential candidates on your ballot, and the only ticket really to vote for is the Democrats, or you're going to get Donald Trump. So I would be very careful with a third-party vote right now. But what else do you think your party has up its sleeves to screw with the Democratic ticket?
I think that's an important piece, and that gets into questions of standing and whether or not Republicans have any standing to complain about what the Democrats decide to do with their ballots. That if if a Democrat decides to make that case, that's a different conversation. But a lot of that is just noise and signifying stupidity by Republicans and thinking that people are going to fall for that. The other thing I think it's important to understand, though, is...
Can I just cut you off for a second there? People are going to fall for that. I think the biggest concern for people is that it's not that there isn't legal standing to put whoever the Democrats haven't even had their convention yet. They should be able to say, here are our nominees.
Right.
They're going on the ballot. There should be no legal challenge. I think people's concern is that, of course, that makes sense, except we live in a world with the Fifth Circuit, with what's her name down in Florida, with the Supreme Court the way it is. And we go, hey, man, justice isn't what it's supposed to be. It's not about what's fair, what's legal, what's justified.
Right.
It's what the Republicans can get the judge to say. And I think that's what people are concerned about. Because, of course, there's legal standing to have the Democratic candidate on the ballot. Our question is, will it get up to the Supreme Court where Clarence and Alito are like, yeah, you know what, like... Actually, the Democrats don't get on the ballot in Ohio or Wisconsin or Nevada. Is that a possibility? I think that's what people are mostly concerned about.
I'm not going to lie to you. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's no telling which direction this could fall if legal challenges are pursued, and then you get into the appeals process based off of the decision. If a lower court says, Republicans get the hell out of here, then they appeal up to the particular circuit, and then there may be some forum shopping, meaning they will look for a more favorable circuit to go to. And then, yeah, you could see this stair step up to the Supreme Court. I think, though, in the main, that's likely not going to happen with respect to the ballot challenges, because as long as the Democrats with this changeover make their deadlines,
Yeah,
they should be
fast. They have
fine.
to do it fast.
Right, they have to do it fast, but as long as that happens, that's why they're doing the virtual nominating process like they did in 20 with COVID. Like you saw the Republicans do it on the first night when they got into the convention hall. Democrats know, because of the timeliness, the 21st of August being one of the first states where you've got to have everything locked in, to get that done sooner. So if there are any issues, you can get them cleaned up before the 21st of August.
Especially since a handful of states start voting in early to mid-September,
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of it. But the other side of this, I think, is it's not so much what the Republican Party is doing. Folks need to pay closer attention to what their state and local boards of elections are and how they're preparing. Because what we did not pay a lot of attention to since 2022, and certainly since 24 at the presidential level, is the number of MAGA who are now on these boards and who have now, are members of these boards who will gum up works. There was a strategic decision made after 20 to make sure to have in place people who would be more friendly to them. That happened at the electoral level, meaning boards of elections, as well as the judicial. There are a lot more Eileen Cannons out there than we may realize that were appointed. Wholly incompetent individuals serving on the judicial bench who are there and would more, like we've seen with Eileen Cannon, which, many of us were saying from the very first moments of this trial on these documents, that her whole game plan was going to be Trump aligned. And she would slow roll this thing for as long as she could. And then Clarence Thomas gave her the one little platform in a dissenting opinion. It wasn't even a majority opinion, in a footnote in that opinion that, the special counsel probably is illegal. Well, that's all I need to know. Case dismissed. So, yeah, we have to be much more vigilant because the rot is real. The corruption is ongoing. And so the process of this election is not just about the head-to-head between Kamala and Trump, but now also what we see playing out at ballot boxes, down ballot, and certainly with the counting of votes and things like that. There was a reason why they bragged about having 50,000 poll watchers, and election officials in strategic battleground locations, precincts, to make sure they have a hand in getting the outcome they want. The cheating is not coming, as in all the cases that have been prosecuted for cheating, the vast majority of those who've been caught have been Republicans trying to cheat the system in the 22 cycle, in the 20 cycle, in the 16 cycle, et cetera. Heritage's own study of election fraud in this country, get this, between 2003 and 2023, 20-year span, right, of election fraud. How many cases did they identify? 1,800. How many of those were actually prosecuted? About half. How many of those led to convictions? About a third. In other words, out of all the elections between 2003 and 2023, you have 18 identifiable prosecutable cases of fraud. What does that tell you about our election system?
It's very safe.
Very safe. So watch for those things to happen. Pay attention to what your boards of elections are doing, the people who are showing up on election day. All those things will matter in this cycle, because I fear a disruption of the process, intimidation to disrupt the process, to cause the delay in processing of votes will certainly be the order of the day.
This has always been the plan. This has always been the plan,
That's
whether
it.
it was Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
That's
The
it.
plan was election suppression, then election vigilantism, going to those drop boxes in Arizona with your gun and intimidating people, intimidating poll workers, making sure people don't want to work at the polls. Challenging votes after they've been made, signature matching, being really vigilant with what kind of ID counts. This has always been the plan. And it doesn't matter who the Democratic candidate is. The Republican plan is to stop people from voting or stop votes from counting, not to win more votes and win hearts and minds. It has always been to get less votes. So before I have you go, I just would love to know your thoughts because I believe the candidate is Kamala. So who do you think should run with her? Who do you think adds the most to the ticket? And what are your thoughts on the potential running mate?
So I have two favorites. Retired Admiral McRaven, who is well regarded, not just in military circles, but in civilian circles as well. And having sort of a military guy with her, I think shores up some foreign policy concerns people have. Although you've got to admit that she has done a good job in handling her assignments overseas.
She's had a master class on international affairs over the past 4 years.
Yeah, she really has, and I think that's made a difference for a lot of folks to watch her kind of step into that space. Sitting at the table with heads of states. I mean, even during the recent NATO meetings, she had what they call bilateral conversations with a number of heads of states. And I think that made a real impression on a lot of the foreign heads of states. But I think someone like, a 4-star admiral like McRaven, who again, straddles both spaces. He's got mad respect on Capitol Hill. He's got mad respect among civilian operations around the country, the business community. They are familiar with him. He was the commander of the U.S. Special Operations, and so he has a large overview of how government and military operations align and work, and of course has great respect and regard overseas. So that's a possibility if they're looking for a military figure. But I think my favorite would be Senator Mark Kelly. I like Mark Kelly a lot. Gabby Giffords, his wife.
So people know, Senator Mark Kelly is the senator from Arizona.
Senator from Arizona.
Who's an astronaut.
His wife is a friend of mine. We are Rodell Fellows together. In fact, in her first year in Rodell with us, she was shot while campaigning for election and severely wounded, survived, thankfully, and has been a staunch advocate with respect to gun violence. And certainly the attempt on her life, the congressional baseball game shooting in which Representative Scalise was wounded, and number of instances of political violence. Having her being a part of that tableau of the president and vice president, I think levels up those conversations. And certainly Senator Mark Kelly, Arizona, important state, battleground state, certainly astronaut, again, tied to the military and foreign policy.
It also gives us a classic white American hero story, which people do love, no matter how far we go down the road to equality. And our country still has a lot of misogyny, and it still has a lot of racism. So having a white male American hero on the ticket does not hurt.
Still matters. So I those are my favorite. I like Governor Beshear of Kentucky. And he's done a phenomenal job getting elected as a Democrat in Kentucky. It's no small feat. So he brings some bona fides. Kentucky is not a battleground. It certainly doesn't mean that Democrats would now win Kentucky with him on the ticket. But what he does is help with the middle of the country, and he does help in some areas where there are center-right independents and sort of right-leaning Democrats, that they could take some comfort in the ticket. Kamala being from California, there's immediate projection of how progressive she is. And she is progressive. She's certainly more progressive than Joe Biden, but not at the same level as,
an AOC.
Yeah, exactly. Pramila Jayapal,
who, by the way, is behind Kamala.
Who is behind, right. And that's an important point, Lee, because the progressives in the House, AOC, Pramila Jayapal, they've aligned themselves behind Kamala. So that's an important coming together of that faction within the Democratic Party. So those would be my choices, I think, at this moment. We'll see where that ball bounces, but I think a military figure like a McCraven or someone like a Governor Beshear or a Senator Mark Kelly covers a lot of important bases for her.
Yeah, I can see that. People are talking too about Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker,
right.
North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. But there is part of me, even Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, although I think the country is too misogynistic for that. But yeah. I would love to see it. But, you got to be practical. But I would love to see someone that didn't take away a role from a Democrat in an important state. I would love to see Andy Beshear stay as governor of Kentucky.
Right.
I would love to see these people stay as the governors of their state. They're doing great jobs. Those are important roles. I would love to see people not lose those seats to the VP position. So I think McCraven is actually a very interesting, someone I hadn't even thought of. So at the end of the day, it seems like everyone is getting behind Kamala, which I think is good. If we're talking about who her VP pick is, then we're not talking about having some sort of weird open contested convention. Every state party so far, the unions, Emily's List, most potential competitors, Newsom, Schiff, Buttigieg, Warren, AOC, they're all behind her. Like you said, the delegates from a bunch of states are already saying we're on her team. She's going to walk into that convention with probably enough delegates. Even a Nikki Haley PAC is behind her now, which is like, yay, let's do that, right?
Yes.
So as you said, may you live in interesting times. It is not a hopeful comment, but it is what we are living through. And as they say on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disney, hold on to your hats and glasses because it's going to be a bumpy ride. So thank you so much for joining me today, Michael. You are my pal, and I really appreciate it because I went from fetal position to powerhouse position, and now I'm back in calm, let's get her done land.
That's it. It's time to get her done, folks. I mean, look, I get the emotional roller coaster we've been on, but throughout that entire time, my view was the end of the line. That's what you need to get to. That's going to require work. It's going to require a higher level of fortitude because we know what's coming after Kamala. We know what's going to be coming. Let's brace for it and push back up against it and carry her across the finish line in November.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's actually just hoist her across that finish line. She is going to, I think we could kill this and it could be so exciting for the entire country.
Yeah, it's going to be I think it's a more interesting campaign now because the idea for a lot of Americans of having two candidates that they don't like because of their age or whatever reason, a lot of that breaks away. Donald Trump is now the oldest person to ever run for president. He's 78. Joe Biden, by the way, was 77 when he did it. So now he's the oldest candidate in this race, who certainly has mental and other acuity issues that I think are important for the New York Times to focus some of its ink on, since they refused to do it up to this point, and other outlets out there. So look, the dynamics have changed. The conversation has changed. And we have no one other than Joe Biden to thank for that. And he put the country before anything else. We know Donald Trump would never do that. And I think the country now should repay that gratitude by paying attention and voting. That's it.
That's it, my friend. Pragmatism, practicality, and patriotism.
There you go.
So that was Michael Steele, reminding us to pay attention to what happens now, that the brave and noble decision for Joe Biden to step down for the good of the country has changed the game. The base might be justifiably angry at how it was done, but we can respect our president enough to take his lead and honor his choice and elect his chosen successor, Kamala Harris. Despite the chaos, Biden's decision lands us in a better place running against the Republicans. It's a prosecutor running against a felon, a young leader against an old one, a woman against a womanizer, and the American dream versus American carnage. I want to thank Michael for joining me today and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now stay in the game, donate, register voters, and for this country's sake, vote. This is our game to lose now, and I certainly don't plan to lose it. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Midas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.